Good morning.
Good morning.
Wow, it's late. All right. Wow, halt mijn kop, Gebber. Oh, geweld. Waking up. Waking up. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem Vav. We left off on Daf Kuf Mem Hey Amid Beis, 10 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We are in the Sugya, where the Abchia Bar Abba and Abasi were sitting in front of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan was dozing off, so to say, and they were having these conversations regarding the 4 topics. We left off the middle of that Sugya. Before we continue, I just want to add to the insight that we gave in the beginning of the Amid, when we spoke about the Tanach of Rabbi and Rabbi Yechanan Royek Mikutach the Bavloim. So Tzemach sent me from Rabbi Kalmanson the same theme, but to add something that we spoke about, the reason why Rabbi Yechanan was repulsed from Kutach. Kutach represents the Michael Dafka of the non-Sadik, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Perek Chav Zayin, as we explained. Rabbi Abba represents the avodah of his sapchon, macholos arevoy, sweet foods, which is why he said a good word that Rashi writes that what was the Tanach of Rabbi Abba? Rashi says that he would keep it in cooking in water, which is the concept of something becoming completely transformed, a solid becoming a liquid. So Mamash fits that the avodah of Eretz Yisrael was on one level, the avodah of Tzadikim, the avodah of the Sapcha, the avodah of Bavloim was the avodah of Hiskafia. And as we are explaining that this Hemshech also fits, that it's not that Rabbi Yechanan found that food to be disgusting, because there is in it the need of fighting against evil, so he was repulsed by the evil, Tzadik Gomer. But the people he respected, as we're learning now, the Sugya, that Rabbi Yechanan never accepted some sort of derogatory way of looking at the Yidden that lived in Babel. We're going to have a machloikes as to from when did the Zuhama, as we'll explain, that the Nachash Puran, from when did it depart from us, either from Ma'amad Har Sinai, or even maybe from a moment, from a time earlier to that, as we'll explain, is it Melmaila Lamata or Melmata Lamaila? We're going to learn on Daf Kuf Mem Vav the concept of breaking open a barrel on Shabbos. B'chlal, opening up a barrel, creating a new Pesach, normally can be viewed as an act of Makabah Patish, but if it's done in a way of destruction, Mekalkel, by Shabbos will be completely permitted. We're going to review the sheet of Rabbi Nechemia regarding Muktzah. Rabbi Nechemia has a very chomurdik application of Muktzah, holding that ein keli nitel elo letashmish hamiyuchad loy. We're going to define better the meaning of a Pesach. An opening biblically means something that is to be functioned, to be used in a two-way street, both lahachnes and lohoitzi. A Pesach that only allows a one-way movement biblically is going to be permitted, and then we'll see why the Chachamim made an Isser. We're going to be learning about whether one is allowed to place a spigot in a cask, or sometimes yeah, sometimes not. ways of carrying begadim. For example, you had a felt blanket that people can use as a cushion. If one were to wrap oneself in it, using it, wearing it as a beged, then it's no longer considered carrying, it's considered a malbush. We're going to move on to learn dinim about storing things in a pulpit. And if we'll get to it, what happens if one's garments fall into water while traveling, whether one is allowed to continue traveling with it, or whether there's a gzeira that someone might be choshid that he did an act of libun on Shabbos, Marasayin b'chadri chadorim, and a lot more. Again, we left off on Daf Kuf Mem Hey Amid Beis, 10 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Here, Rabbi Yechanan, who woke up, right, is opining. He's giving his insights as to the 4 questions that was asked by Rabbi Chia bar Abba to Rav Asi, and he rejected generally Rav Asi's approach. Good. Continues the Gemara. This is where we're up to Rabbi Yechanan now. His answer. Why is it that in Bavel the Yom Tov was celebrated with greater simcha than Yom Tovim in Eretz Yisrael? So the answer that Rav Asi gave was, if you remember, because the Bnei Eretz Yisrael are aniyim. Remember that? So therefore they save, so to say, all of their joy, like we spoke out to Rashi. I'm reading Rashi again, that b'chol hashana ein lehem simcha, b'maychal u'b'mishnah. Not they can afford proper Michael Mishnah, nor do they have Mirgoya from Elacha. So everything is on Yom Tov. Yom Tov they mamash appreciate. Says Rabbi Yechanan, mepnei mamayadam shuravel semechem, mepnei shelo yehayu ba'oisa klalam. First of all, you're right, that Mayadim and Bavel has greater joy. But it's because there was a certain klala that Hashem put upon those who live in Eretz Yisrael, as it says, Dichsiv, this is written in Hosea, that v'hishbati kol mesoisa. This is what God says, that I will end all her joy. From when? From Chaga, from Chatsha, from Shabta, v'chol moyadeh. And furthermore, Iksiv, that Hashem told us that Chatshechem u'mayadechem sana nafshi. And not only sana nafshi, but choyu alaylo toirach. But Hashem says, your Yom Tovim became a burden to me. And what's the meaning? My choyu alaylo toirach. Amar Rebbe Elazar, that Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, leidayin liyisrael shechoitim lefanai, elo shematrich enoisi, leida ezik zeda kosher avi aleim. That there was a certain klala that dafka during Yom Tov, some calamity would befall us. And that was a tircha, so to say, on the Eibishter, and he was upset by the fact that we caused them to have to undergo a tircha. Just I'll let a chremes, we can tell the Eibishter, tircha is awesome. A tircha, you say that's for sure awesome. But what's the tircha? What was the klala that used to come upon us during Yom Tov? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, that Eilecha kol regel beregel, sholei basa boi leshes litzipoidi. Every Yom Tov, there were troops of the Romans that, they came to plunder, right, to cause havoc on Yom Tov, Tutzipoidi. Or v'amar Rabbi Chanina, Eilecha kol regel v'regel, sholei bala Tveria. This is during Yom Tov. Egmoin, the Kamtoin, the Balzamaida, all different types of Roman officials that would come then to Tveria on Yom Tov, whether it is to steal from us or to charge extra taxes, right, to stealing from us. And that klala was because of the non-good behavior that happened by the Yidden before the Churban. And that klala was limited. Hashem made that klala to the Yidden that were living in Eretz Yisrael, but it was only for them. So if there is no external reason to take away our joy, this is really what Rabbi Yechanan is saying, the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael would also have joy. But there other things come upon us. And in Babel, these things don't happen. Next, so what did Rabasi answer? Because they're not B'nai Torah. That was important, right? And as Rashi writes before, that if they would not wear chashuva clothing, then no one would give them honor. Says Rabbi Yechanan, and they wore beautiful clothing, unlike the Talmud Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael, because since they did not originate from that location, And as the Amri Inchi, as people say, B'masa Shemai, when you are in your own city, your name is enough. People know you. Since people know you, they'll honor you for who you are. But B'loi Masa, if you are not in your city, in order to get honor, you have to rely on clothing. So in other words, it's not because they were not B'nai Torah, they were B'nai Torah. Nevertheless, this is the klal, that if you are a person who should be respected, this is not personal, but this is because they were B'nai Torah, then you have to make an effort also. Act accordingly. Acting meaning even b'chitzonius, you have to make an effort of wearing special garments to help it, to make it easier for people who don't know you as well yet to be machabed you. All right, and now is Arayah to Rabbi Yechanan that what? That the Yidden in Babel are B'nai Torah. Again, it's a different type of Torah. That's really the machloikes. The machshakim hoishivani goes on Talmud Bavli. You would think that Rabbi Yechanan would side with Ravasi. It's the Torah of darkness. He was machabed that. He appreciated that. It says in the pasuk in Yeshaya, Boim Yashrish Yaakov, those of Yaakov who come, there's a promise. Yashresh, they'll take root. Yatzitz v'farach Yisrael, that they will bud and they will blossom. So says Abraisa, learned in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yosef, you know who that refers to. Who are those of Yaakov who are coming? We're coming to Babel. Elu Talmidei Chachamim shebeBabel. And on them Yeshaya says that Yotzitz v'farach, which means that they're going to grow in Torah. Sha'ois and tzitzin u'prachim la Torah. They bud and they blossom in Torah. So it's a different type of Torah. But you can't say Rabbi Yechanan didn't want for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael that had Talmud Yerushalmi. There's no darkness; it's straight to the light. He did not view the Torah of Babel as she'einam b'nei Torah. They wore garments because of a klal that b'lei masa is toisvoi. And for the fourth question, mipnei ma'oivdei kechavim mezuhamim, and this zuhama is some sort of ruchnias dika bad odor, which also manifests in a physical bad odor, and that you don't find by Talmidei Chachamim. Or here, generally, you don't find it by Yidden, only by Yevdei Kechavim. So the answer is, Shaliyamdu al Har Sinai, because the Goyim were not standing around Har Sinai. Finally, turning to today's DAF, Shabashah, DAF Kuf Mem Vav, Paparamit. The Ba, or that Rashi adds a cuff, right? Kish Sheba Nachash al Chabon, that when the Nachash, right, Kishaba, look, if you read inside the top Rashi, look inside Rashi, Kishanasan la eitz or lechol min eitz, Ba'aleha. Dichsiv Hanachas, this is Chava telling the Eibishter, Hanachas Hishiani, which means literally that the Nachash deceived me. But Rashi is saying that Hishiani is from the Lashon of Nesuyin. Lest people think everything is as a grub. It doesn't have to mean a physical act. It means the meaning that when the concept of sinning was foreign to Chava, whose idea was it? Whose Chachma was it? A Chachma of Klipa was the Chachma of the Nachash. When she was open and she received, she was penetrated by that chachma, that's pshat, that kishabah Allah. There was an interaction where the Nachash was mashpi on Chava, and that affected on Chava, and therefore on all mankind, says the Gemara, hitil bazu hama, a certain ruchnias dika, and therefore also gashmi's dika impurity was imbued in Chava and her descendants. However, Yisrael shamdu al Har Sinai, when we stood around Har Sinai, is paska zuhamasa. In other words, the antidote, the counter of that klipa was us now being opened and receiving the ultimate chachma of kedusha, chachma shel HaKadosh Baruch. However, since they were not under Har Sinai, loy paska zuhamasa. What about Gadim? Amalei afal gav the inu lo yahavu, even though Gadim were not there, but mazulai yohave. Mazulai, as we learn in Chassidus, refers to the level of chai of the neshama. As it says in Parshas Nitzavim, es asher yesh le'prei imanu oimed hayom lefnei Hashem Elokeinu. That is with whom Hashem made the bris. The es asher einenu poi. The es asher einenu poi is not referring to me, not referring to you. Because even though our bodies were not there, but our neshamas were there, even the lower levels of the neshama. So it's not the way that pshat people learn Eis Hasher Einenu Pai means for the future generations. No, they were there. Who is Einenu Pai? The lower levels of the neshama of the Gadim were taken not there, But since their higher level, their mazel was there, so even with them, the effect of Sinai was that the Zuama left. Now, the Gemara wants you to know that Opligi the Rabbi Abu Bar Kahana, until the third generation Yid, beginning with Avraham Avinu, indeed, the Zuama did not depart from us. And therefore, one of the consequences of the Zuhama was Avraham, as Yishmael. That was a consequence of the Zuhama. Yitzchak Hoylid as Esav. Once you see that Yaakov was Hoylid Shnei Masar Shvatim, in other words, Mitasei Shleimah, because Shaloi Hoya Bahen Shum Doifi, is a raya that from the times of Yaakov there was no Zuhama. And my friends, this is a very important machloikas. This is not just from what point in history. The question is, is one able to get rid of the Zuhama by themselves? Milmato Lamaila. So the sheet of Rabbi Yechanan is no. No, the only way to get rid of the Zuhama is when Hashem comes to you. If there's a Gili Oy Milmaila Lamata, such a level of Chachma of Kedusha, it completely shines away and takes away the Chachma of the Nachash, only then do you get rid of the Zuhama. So this ladder, the Abba Bar Kahana holds that even before the Milmaila Lamata, even when it was Avodah, so to say, the from our own, Milmata Lamaila, we on our own can get rid of the Zuhama. And therefore the question maybe would be, can Oivik Yechavim get rid of the Zuhama? According to the latter opinion and potential, yeah. They don't need to have a Maimed Har Sinai for that to happen. Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah, as we're saying that as we head towards the end of Shabbos, we're learning, let's say use the words miscellaneous issues of Shabbos. It's beautiful because we're going me'ingen le'ingen. We're not following one topic. Now this Mishnah is going to be speaking about the concept of kilkul. Right, this is a very classical question. This is also Negea Lamaisa, opening up a bottle on Shabbos, opening up a can on Shabbos. All right. So the issue is, are you making a keli? And even though Rashi holds l'shitasi ain't being invested of a kalim, okay, but we have the words of MERCAVA patish. Are you finalizing something? Now, when it comes to the bottle or to the can, like I mentioned, that's much less problematic because it's not meant to last. That's what, as the Alter Rebbe speaks about, when you crack open a nut, you throw away the clip. It doesn't bother me. But what happens if you have a cask, a chavis, and this is meant to last? So says the Mishnah that shoyver adam es a chavis lechel imenu groigerus. If you have a chavis that's filled with dried figs and you have to break it open, you are allowed to break it open, making a Pesach, as long as your kavanah is not to make it into a keli, meaning that if the Pesach is a proper symmetrical round or symmetrical square opening, it means your intent is to make this into a bona fide Pesach, you got a problem. Rashi, MERCAVA patish. According to others, binyan. But if the opening in itself is a non-symmetrical opening, so we're going to define this as an act of kilkul. You destroyed it. You ruined it. True, before you couldn't take anything out, and now you could. But an act of kilkul is allowed to be made. Right, there other details, says the Mishnah, the ein noikvin megufa shel chavis. A megufa was that when you had a chavis that already had a prior opening, but it was stopped up with a clay stopper. Megufa is a clay stopper. As if so many lidim about this. Now the question is, can you make a hole in it? Here, you can view this hole not so much as an act of kilkul, because once you make a hole in the clay stopper, now the liquid can go in, can go out. And indeed, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim will be mated. We're going to learn in the Gemara, my friends, a lot more as what's underlying this machlokes. And furthermore, that will lead us into the next statement. All this will have to leave for the Gemara, which will be right now. But don't perforate the megufa l'chura on the side. That's the one way of learning the Mishnah. It's all going to boil down as whether you're doing something which is usual, whether it's viewed as an act of kilkul or not. And again, we're going to define the machlokes in this line when we get to the Gemara. Next. If you have a chavis, if you have a cask that already has a hole in it, and on Shabbos you want to plug it, okay, so don't use wax. What's the issue with using wax? That you're going to be smoothing. You know what? The wax. You're going to be smoothing the wax itself. And mimoreach is a tulda of memachek, which is what they did to the hides right, at a step of getting it ready, of smoothing it out by getting rid of all of the fats that are adhered to it, or the hair. Rabbi Yehuda, and Zajac in the city called Arav in Eretz Yisrael, and he paskened that he heard that someone put shaiva in the barrel. That I'm afraid that he might be liable. Not for sure. Again, we'll see more details about these shaiva, these wax stoppers. Says the Gemara Amara B'Oishia, that when it comes to the opening up of the Mishnah, when the Mishnah spoke about if you cut open the top of the barrel, and we view that act as a non-symmetrical opening, so it's not called a Pesach, it's called an act of Kilkol. But Rabbi Oishia says, hold on, I have another issue. The Mishnah spoke about you opening it up with a knife. Who said you are allowed to move a knife to break open a cask? Now, why not? So we're going to learn that there is one Tana, Rav Nechemia, that's very makbet when it comes to muksa, and he holds that you may only move a keli for the purpose for what it was made for. So Amar Rabbi Shanu, you know when the Mishnah allowed that? When there isn't another issue of muksa, when it was the rusais, that the groigeres in there were pressed figs. Pressed figs are so tightly pressed together that you, in order for you to be able to eat those figs, you need to have a knife to break them or to cut them. So since you are allowed to transport the knife, which is needed for the groigeres, now you can already use it to open up the cask. But if the figs were loose, or if there were other contents in the cask, like there was wine in there, then it's called an act of kilkol, but you may not transport the knife. Taking the knife is going to be an act of moving muksa. And again, like we mentioned, like the Gemara says, how can you say that? Meisvei says in a Braisa, the Rabbi and the Shimon ben Gamliel, maybe Adam as a chavi yishol yayin, wine, umatis roisha b'sayif, umanich lefnei ha'orchem ve'eino choishish. Again, because when you cut open a chavis with a knife, you're not doing it symmetrical. It's not an issue of makeh b'patish. Yes, it's called an act of kilkul, but there you're moving the knife for wine. So the Gemara says, yeah, I know that. That Braisa follows the Rabbanan, which is the way we pass it. I can move a knife, but Masnis is Rav Nechemia. And again, Rav Nechemia holds this concept of ein keli nitel elo latashmish hamiyuchaloi. Now the question is, why? Why are you saying that our Mishnah is Rav Nechemia and limiting it to my duchkei that Rabbi Shelo ikma mesisik Rav Nechemia, and therefore saying it's only b'derusais, which normally is what groigeres means. But why are you limiting the Mishnah? Why don't we say that our Mishnah is even speaking about a case where the figs are mefurados, for which you don't need a knife to have access to the figs, to eat the figs, to break the figs away from its cake? Maybe the Mishnah follows the Rabbanan. So Amar Ravana, he's right. Because Masnisin Kasha say, my idiot, the 20 groigeres, say Peris, the fact that we chose a narrow product, Shmamino, Bidrusais, and again, our Mishnah is following Shitas Rav Nechemia. Says the Gemara Tanach, Tanya Chada, Choishaloi Shel Groigeres Shel Tamarim, that if you have these baskets that were filled with groigeres, right, dried figs, or filled with tamarim, and these baskets had covers, these covers were temporarily, closed, and they needed to be untied, either with your hands or using kalim. So one brayse says that mafkia, you are allowed to be mafkia, means to untie the basket cover with your hands, or the chaytech, untie them with a knife, and you're good. The Tanya Idach, what we learned in another brayse, here the word is going to be b'chlal, untying. It's only temporary. These baskets were made, for you to remove the food. We learned in another brayse that matir, with your hands, you are allowed to. But you may not use a keli to unravel them or to cut them. And like Kasha, Haraban and Harav Nechemia, both agree as far as the act of opening up this basket, since they were already, it's different. It's not because you're doing an act of kilkul. The Pesach was made. The covering is temporary. You're undoing something that was to begin with temporary. Not a problem. But here again, according to Rav Nechemia, a knife, how are you taking a knife? Ein kelinitil elul tashmish, right? Haroyeloi. The Tanya Rav Nechemia Omer, that afilu tarvad, vafilu talus, vafilu sakin. Wow. He gives 3 examples. Moving a spoon, moving a talus, moving a knife. Ein nitalin elo l'soirech tashmisham. All right. Says the Gemara. By my name of Absheshes. Maulim mivras chavisam bevurtia b'shapsam. Can you take a spear and throw it into the side of a cask? In other words, you're making a new hole, but again, you're using a spear. That means that you're not making a perfectly round, symmetrical hole. Are you allowed to do it or not? And now the Gemara is going to explain the 2 sides of the bayah. Do we say that you're doing this to create a new opening, and therefore what? We're going to say, yes, it is an act of MERCAVA patish, and therefore it's going to be yasid. All he wants to do is that there was an opening before. And as many of us are familiar, when you have a closed keli and there's only one opening, the liquid can flow out in a more limited way. The moment you make another opening, allowing oxygen to flow in, you know what that causes? It causes that the prior opening functions better. Liquid flows out better. It's all about kavana. If his intent was only to make sure that the opening that was already there is going to be better serving us by allowing the wine to flow out quicker, then we won't view, even though you did make a hole, but again, you're not using a perfect keli to make a round hole. Then we're going to say again, that in itself is like an act of kilkul. It's only helping something else, and it will be okay. Amalahu, that we say indeed, and therefore it's asig. Now don't forget, it's not chayv chatos, because it's not symmetrical. But if you intend to make a new hole, these holes are permanent, then it's going to be us. We just quoted the Braisa, Rabban Shimon and Gamliel, maybe Adam Chavish Yayin Umatis Rosh Hashanah. So there the Gemara says, no, Hassan, Badai La'ayin Yafakom Achavin. Hach over here, because there was no hole before. You're opening it up just to get the contents out. And the hole in itself is not done professionally. Why don't, we're speaking though, the case of Rav Sheshes is that, there was a little hole like we mentioned, and it was common that these holes were stopped up with a megufa, and you wanted the wine to flow out quicker. If all you wanted was for the wine to flow out quicker, instead of keeping the little hole in the megufa, there was always the ability of removing the entire megufa. When you remove that stopper, then imagine the hole becomes triple, 4 times, 10 times the size. So if so it's a haraya, you didn't only want for the wine now to flow out by ayin yafa. You wanted to create a new opening. So he's holding that creating a new opening, right? Here, it's not to get access to the food. You have access to the food. You want to have another opening in a cask, and that opening will remain permanent, even though it's not symmetrical. But if that is your kavanah, then it's also midrabanan. Okay. Then we had in the Mishnah.
Rabbi.
Yes.
But do they all agree that if the other hole is just to help the flow, then it's okay?
If that is your kavanah clear, it's okay. Yeah. Yes. Now, in the Mishnah we had this. Can you perforate this megufa, this stopper? Machlokes Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, and then the Mishnah says, but not from the side. Now we'll clarify what that means. So Amar Rav Huna, says Rav Huna that the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda was the machmer, right? The Chachamim were the lenient ones. That's if the hole that we are referring to is on the top of the megufa. But if you're making the hole minatzad, and that is a better way of getting the liquid out of the megufa. It's the moment you do something which is the common way of doing it, then we will view this hole as, let's go with Rashi, as MERCAVA patish. That's an isur d'oraisa. And that's taka. Now the meaning that it flows. Everyone is minded to that. However, Rabbi Chizda says no. The machlokes is only minatzad. Minatzad meaning in the side of this megufa. Aval al gabam divrei hakol mutar. It says in the Mishnah, because it's so unusual, it's called an act of kilkul. It says in the Mishnah, loik venom mitzida. So says the Rabbi Chizda, that statement is not making a hole in the megufa. That is hasam begufa de chaviyas. Any new hole in the gufa shel chaviyas is something that the Mishnah says is prohibited because, like we mentioned, that for sure is making a new hole in the keli. You already have a magufa. You don't need, you have access of getting, why are you making a new hole? And therefore you're violating MERCAVA patish. Tanach Rabbanan. Ein noikven nekev chodesh b'Shabbos. However, the imol hoisif, then moisif. The yesh oimrem, even when it comes to adding, ein moisifin. However, v'shavin shenokven nekev yoshan lechatchila, that if there was a hole that was there, you're not making it bigger. It was closed up. You are just reopening something old. Then you are allowed to do it. You did nothing. Says the Gemara, V'tana kamon, Mishnah min nekev chodesh deloi, because to come a second pischa. So why don't we say that if you're adding, why does he allow you to add? Oisufanami come a second pischa. So Amarabba, this is the word. Dvar toira kol pesach she'enoi asu lahachnas u'loitzi. A pesach means a two-way street. And if it's not a two-way street, then ain't a pesach. Very good. And therefore, if one were to, now guys, in the cask, this is important. All of these perforations in a cask, whether it is from the top, from the side, in the magufa, on the top of the magufa, on the side of the magufa, all of that was little, which allows wine to flow out, but it wasn't for anything to go in. You don't put contents through that hole. So let's understand, oh, that's a good word. That, therefore, making the holes, the lashon was always awesome. This hole, even if it's a MERCAVA patish, is not going to be a violation of an isur d'orais. Eloma. The Chachamim came ahead and they said that midrabanan, even a hole that is only a one-way street is prohibited. Why? Midrabanan hu de gazen mishum lul shel tarnagoyim, which is gavaldik. A lul of tarnagoyim needs to have little holes. Why does it have to have little holes? Most people think it's only for it's only for ear to enter, but it's not true. In a lushal tanagoyim, not only do you need to have fresh ear to enter, but the stinkachs that they make is so strong that they'll suffocate on it. That hevel has to go out. So a lushal tanagoyim is the exception where the hole is little. People think it's a one-way hole, but really it's not. The other both la ayule avira, which is what people think is the only reason, but it's also la puke havla. So and over there, the imba lohoisif, I'm sorry, and therefore the Chachamim said that if we will allow you to make a one-way hole, which is what's permitted d'oraisa, then a people erroneously, mistakenly will make a hole in a lushal tanagoyim. There it's also d'oraisa. So you know what the Chachamim said? Even if it's taka a one-way hole, you're never allowed to do it. Now, which is why we're saying that making a hole in a cask is also midrabanan of making a pesach, which is MERCAVA patish. Now we'll explain why this Tana holds that you can add to a hole. Because since the whole reason of a one-way hole is also because of lushal Tana goyim, in the lul of Tana goyim, you would never make the hole bigger. Because why are the chickens in a coop? Because the very vulnerable creatures, any type of rodent can go and eat them up. You'll never make it bigger, not wanting for them to get destroyed. The imbal of moisif, you know why? Oisufei vadai, since belul shotanagoyim lo yasi lo oisufei. Finally, turning to DAF, kufmen vava medeis, because of richasha, because you are afraid that creeping things will go in there. Again, guys, a hole in a cask is a one-way street. It's only for wine to exit. And over here, there isn't even an Isur Midrabanan, which is why, according to this Tana, you can be moisif. You can be moisif to any hole that was already there from before Shabbos. Well, now, the Tana the Braisa said that the Yeshoimnim, that also a moisifin. Why? Because let's go back to the Lushal Tana Goyim, Amoida. A Pesach that's made for movement only one way is only Isur Midrabanan, Gzeira for Lushal Tana Goyim. But there are times that when someone made this chicken coop, the Chacham didn't know what he was doing. And the hole was so little that it wasn't even big enough for ear to go in and out. So after a while, you are moisif to it. And when it comes to a lushal tanagoyim, there are times that the hole is so little that it's not functioning, the ear is not going in, the hevel is not going out, and you need to be marviach it, good. And that again is an isur d'oraisa. People don't know that. But why is it an isur d'oraisa? Because the function is a two-way. So therefore, same gezerah. You can never be moisef to any Pesach. Says the Mordechay Mishum Rabbi Yechanan, halacha ki yashomrim l'chumra. And even if you have a pre-existing hole, you may not expand it. You may not expand it. Very good. Guys, we're speaking about a chavis. Appreciate that. It's not similar to the examples I spoke out today because we are living in a discarder. Everything is disposable. That has a permanency. The heter would be because it's not done symmetrical. But nevertheless, if it was not functioning and you're making it into functioning, or you're bettering its functionality, even though it's only for wine to exit, so it's derabanan, but nevertheless, it's asur. Mishnah, and now we're quoting, this is referring back to the Braisa, that shenoikvin neked yashan lechatchila, because you're doing nothing. Before Shabbos, the neked yashan was stopped up. You're still doing nothing. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, that loishanu ela b'makom ha'asui l'shamid. Let's define better, why was this cask plugged up? If the plug that was placed there, that you're removing now on Shabbos, was only l'shamid, l'shamid means it was only to preserve the aroma of the wine, which means that the plug was not very tightly, perfectly inserted. We still view this as a cask with a hole that's closed, but it's not like the hole was removed or the hole was erased. Since the hole, that's the right word, it was not erased, you can reopen it on Shabbos. But if prior to Shabbos the plug was put there lachazek, not only to plug it up, but to strengthen the cask, which means it was a better plug, which means halachically that plug, so to say, erased the entire hole. So now if you're going to open it, you're making a new one. And therefore, again, it's awesome. How would you know how it was put? So there's a certain way of defining it. If that hole that was plugged up before Shabbos was above the level of the wine, and appreciate that if there is no liquid leaning on the inside of the wall and on the hole, right? So then the type of plug needed is very weak. It's not only to keep the good aroma in there. The aroma should not escape. But once the hole was under the wine and you plugged it because you did not want for the wine to spill out, now that plug needs to be put in tighter, better. If it's put in there better, then it was mevatel the hole. Zeh l'chazek. Rabbi goes even more. Even lamatam and ayayin, it depends on what level of the cask. Right, if it's high up or down there. High up, yeah, it has to be stronger than a hole. The plug has to be stronger than a hole that's above the wine level, but nishkaferla. Lamatam and ayayin is also l'shamer. You know when we say it's l'chazek, going shenikva lamatam and ashmarim. Right, you have the shmarim. They're all the way in the bottom. If you have a hole all the way in the bottom and you plugged it up, all of the weight is on that part. There you plug needed to be as a gesund. That plug is so strong that it's mabatel the hole. And therefore, again, that hole may not be reopened on Shabbos because halachically you are creating a new hole. And now Amalei Abaye Teravam. In other words, you are telling me that even if the hole is lamatam and ayayin, it's still not considered lachazik. Lachazik is like the strongest plug possible. We find two other areas in halacha that are misayeya to your shita. Number one, it says Abraisa in Bava Basra, Bayis Sasum, Yesh Yarba Ames, and now she reminds us around 15, 16 lines from the top of the Amid that if me and you have a home sharing a chatzir, the chatzir belongs to both of us in partnership. If we want to divide the partnership, right? So what was the whole dinim? That as long as after we divided, each part still retains the shame of that property, then one can enforce a division. So chatzir. So there's a rule that if you have a piece of land that's less than dalad amis, it's not called a chatzir. So therefore, for me to be able to tell my partner, let's divide the chatzir, it has to have at least 8 by 8 amis. So even after you divide it, each one has a chatzir. Now there's a detail. If I have a house and you have a house and we make a division on the chatzir, it's not that we just give each one half of the chatzir. No. Before you divide the chatzir, every door to the house acquires 4 amas into the yard, which is the place needed for you to unload your animal to bring stuff into the house. Which means that if I have a house and you have a house and we have a yard that we share, if my house happens to have 4 doors and your house will have 1 door, I'm going to get a lot more real estate than you. every Pesach eats up 4 amas, and only the remaining is divided in half. Now the same kasha. What happens if I have a house with 4 doors, but prior to our chalukah of the chatzir, the doors were closed off? So how strong of a closure must there be for us to say, that's it, the door is no longer, it was mevatel the Pesach? So we learned over there that even if the door is sasum, still yesh le arba amas, which will be similar to over here. Even though the hole is plugged, it's still considered a hole, and you can reopen it on Shabbos. It's only when Padas at Simov, only if not only did you put, let's say, drywall over the door, you needed to take off the door frame. When you take off the door frame, now you're mevatel the Pesach. Then, if now you make the division, ein le arba amas, and you have another din. Now we're going to the dinim of Tum and Taro, and that is that if there is a mace in a house, someone gets all the way up to the walls of the house, they're not tummy. If mace is in a kaver, in a closed area, the kaver is metame everything that's within 4 amas from the walls of the kaver. What separates a kaver from the house? A mausoleum from a house, not the size of it. The question is, does it have doors or not? Any closure that has no doors and no windows, that's called a kaver. And now the din will be that if you get, not only if you go over it, if you come within 4 amas of it, then you're already going to become tamei. The moment the mausoleum has a opening, so then it's called a bias. And you're not going to be tamei if you come within 4 amas from it. So here comes the same kasha. What happens if there was a door, but the door is now covered? So bias asum ain't a matamas svivov, even though it's sealed off, and right now there's no way of getting in there. It's not called a kaver. But it says after they put the mace in there, they not only closed off the door, but they took off the door frame. So now metame kol svivov. In other words, only the strongest type of stopper possible. That is where we say that this erased the hole, and now from now on, it's like any other cast, that making a new Pesach in a way that's not called kilkul. That's the Mishnah. Let's not forget that. If I make a Pesach in a destructive way, again, there's no problem. But if it's not called kilkul, and now you made a hole, and even though, again, the hole is only to allow wine to go out, it's going to be asur midrabanan because of MERCAVA patish. Says the Gemara Vayta. Gufsa. Gufsa is a spigot. And now the question will be, forget about a hole. Can I insert a spigot in the cask on Shabbos? Machlokes. Rav says asur, Shmuel says muter, and now the Gemara is going to limit their machlokes. If you don't even have the spigot, now spigots, you're thinking about a piece of metal, that's nowadays. Then they would push it, use a reed. So if we're not speaking about koitzer, we're not speaking about cutting the reed off the ground. No, we're speaking about you have reeds, but they were never cut for a spigot. That lukula amalek liga the aser. Ahadure, if that reed was already custom made for the hole and it was functioning before Elama when Shabbos came in, it was not inserted in there. Lukula amalek liga the shade. Kepligi the chaticha. It was already somewhat prepared, but the loy mesakna, it was not done perfectly. So now what's the issue is, Manda Asad, which is Shitas Rav, Gazin, and Dilma Asil, and Michtak Lachatchila. We are afraid that if it's not going to fit perfectly, you're going to rectify it. And Manda Shara, he says, Gazina. And now the Gemara says, this, Machlokes, Rav and Shmuel, is really Kitanoi. And now goes a Tana, goes a Braisa, Ein Choytchin, Shefeferes B'Yantif. Interesting. We're not even speaking about Shabbos, we're going to Yantif. Don't forget, even according to the most lenient Shitas Beis Hillel, anything for Eichel Nefesh, but if it could have been done from before Yom Tiv, it's not going to be fresher because you waited till later, you may not do it. So indeed, we're speaking about someone that's going to prepare the reed, right, to make it into a spigot, and however, on the other hand, if it was already there but nafla, guys, take out the words ein, then yes, machzir noise b'Shabbos. The ein tzarach leim b'yantiv. And now look at the words. Now that we said that you are allowed to, Rabbi Yoshio's mekel doesn't flow. So the Gemara says, 1 second, Rabbi Yoshio made the kula on what statement? If it's on the Reisha, that the Reisha is speaking about preparing a shefeferes, how can he be mekel? No one will hold to that. Hakum Misakin Mana. Manish, that should be Yisodoi, nice. Ella Seifo doesn't make sense. The Tanakama also said it's mutter. Tanakama Nami Mishra Shari. So therefore, you have to make Achsura Mechsera. Ella the Chaticha B'Misaknik Iminayu. The unspoken case is that it was already pre-prepared, and Wamat wasn't fitted in there yet, which means it might need as additional perfection. Mar goes on. This is the Tanakama who's Machman Rabbi, right? Rabbi Yosha is the Mekel. That goes in. We are afraid that if it doesn't fit perfectly, even though it's going to be functional, but you're gonna finalize it. That's mamash makav patish. Omar Sova, that what that goes in on. Darash Rab Shisha b'nei Rabbi b'shmei Rabbi Yechanan. The halacha is like Rabbi Oishia, and we're not afraid. Guys, this even nowadays, right? When you open up boxes to take cereal out, we are already accustomed. We know that on Shabbos we can be misakin money, and if it comes to food, if you have to get to the food, as long as what you do is called an act of kilkul, not perfect, we're used to this. Then we do it. Then we rip open the bag. I know there are many other areas. Again, a bag to begin with is a lot more lenient because it's not something that's going to last as long as a cast. But we're not afraid that people are going to do it in a perfect way on Shabbos. People know that perfecting a keli on Shabbos indeed is awesome. Okay, back to the Mishnah. They mice in the Kuva, right? So the Mishnah now went to what may you use. You don't have a megufa. A megufa is a proper stopper, a plug. Can you take wax and stick it into the hole? So the Mishnah says no. Why no? Because the wax, the type of wax that they had, in order for you to properly put it in the hole, you're going to smooth out the wax, and that is an act of mimoreyach. As we mentioned, it's a tulda of memachik. Says the Gemara, what about mishcha? Well, it's very hard to understand. The oil that we have, oil will stop or plug a hole. Obviously, these oils were very thick. Yeah, there are many things together here. The pressure of the wine in the hole was very weak. And there was a certain type of oil that would successfully close the hole. So, and the Gemara says that Mishra, Rav is machmer, but Shmuel is matir. Now, there's no mimoreach by oil. You're not smoothing it. It's already so liquidy. Elomal di make exeda, mandasar, which is Rav Gazrin and Mishum Shaiva. If you can use the oil, the stick oil, you might end up using the wax. Umandashare, again, Shmuel, the second time already right now, is lenient, says Loy Gazrin. Amalei Rav Shmuel bar Chanel Rav Yosef, that the Ferush Omrat Lan in the name of Rav, that Mishcha is Shari. So I don't even accept that Rav Asad, you yourself told us that Rav, our Machlekes, Amoiroi, Beshitas Rav. Says the Gemara. Okay, Omar Tavus Rishba. We had him a while back. Tavus, the hunter, said in the name of Shmuel, that Hai Tarfa the Asa. If you have a myrtle leaf, now, a myrtle leaf, obviously, guys, we're not speaking about ripping a myrtle leaf off the ground. That's koitzim, right? As we'll see in a moment, there is a myrtle leaf that can be on a branch. The branch is already disconnected. Taking it off the branch is also not what we're talking about. We're speaking about you have a leaf, and when you circle it, you make it into a circle. It becomes a gavaldika spigot. We can relate to that. So says Tavus in the name that a high taught for the Asa, Shmuel is the grace lenient. No, he does not allow you to insert it in the hole, making it into a spigot. And why was he machma here? So my Talmud, so Rabbi Yemar medifti Yomar, that because the Zayda Mishum Marzeif. Now here we have a big discussion. What exactly is this Marzeif? This Marzeif is Marzeif means a gutter, but it doesn't mean a gutter. That there were other improvised means of creating a spigot. Using the myrtle leaf per se is b'chlal not a problem. It's so temporary. You take it in, you'll take it out. But other materials and bending them in a way where you can put them into the hole and they'll become the gutter or the spigot, that is something that would be at least asur midrabanan. And Shmuel says that I don't allow you to insert the asa because if you can do that, then you can use a material that we're calling here a marzeif, and that is something that's asur. Rav Ashi says that's not the reason. We're not afraid that if you can use the myrtle leaf, you're going to make something of more permanency. No, you won't. We are afraid that if you don't have the leaf already ready, you're going to rip it off. Now, important, not Shema Yiktam, you're going to rip it off the ground. Shema Yiktam is you're going to rip it off a branch that's already disconnected. But we don't want you to rip it off the branch. So therefore, don't use the hadas. And my binayu, very big, the katamu manchi. That if you have already a whole pile of these hadasim leaves, according to Rav Ashi, you'll be allowed to use it. You know, sometimes when you make a gezeda, we say, like, look, once the gezeda is made, we don't make a difference. We see Bechal Shmuel is very lenient. Maybe it's because it's about getting food. If anything, you'll be violating an Isur Derabanan. So Taka, he only said it's usher if this is the only one that you have. If something is going to happen to it, you might rip off another one and you'll think you're allowed to do it because your branch is already disconnected. Okay, next case. Mamash moving the inyan la'inyan, the connection l'chud is just a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Now we're going into the Isur of Hoitzah. Now garments is not called a masui, garments is called a malbush. This is something that we're going to get clearly into the sugya of carrying a towel for the mikvah on Shabbos. People make them into a scarf. Mamash, this comes from our Gemara. In other words, can I take something and make it into a beged, wearing it like a beged? Does it automatically leave toiras masui and become toiras malbush? That's the case. Bei sadia. Bei sadia is some sort of felt material that people would use actually as a cushion. Then they didn't have chairs, they sat on the ground. But it was something that was large enough and soft enough that you could put it on you the way you would put a today talis gadol. Rav said awesome. You know, we don't say I'm wearing it like a talis. Shmuel says it's mutter. And now the Gemara limits their machlokes. Birakin, if it's a very soft material, it's mutter, because why not? As we'll see, it doesn't have to be something that was made for a malbush. If it's something that functions as a malbush properly and you wear it like a malbush, it's okay. Because if it's very stiff, everyone agrees that it's awesome. And this is typical Gemara. How do you define that? That the Gemara doesn't go in. Hipligi, the machlekes is b'metzieh, in between soft and thick, in between soft and hard. Manda asar, which is shitov rav, mechse kamasoi, because it's somewhere in between. If it would be harder, it already would look like a masoi. Manda shari holds that way mechse kamasoi. And now the Gemara says, don't think that Rav and Shmuel, at least Rav befedish said it's asur, v'hada Rav lav befedish itmer, ella michlala itmer. And as we're going to see here, and that's a good klal to remember, that whenever the Gemara says lav befedish itmer, ella michlala itmer, you're going to ask lamay nafkamina. Who cares? That's a shita. No. The Gemara many times means to say by this that it's only miklala itmer. You inferred it from a story, but you made the wrong inference. If Rav said it, then that's what Rav said. As we'll see, we're challenging that this is Rav shita. Why did you think Rav holds that you may not wrap yourself around the felt, which is what happened? Because the Rav iklalahu asram. Rav once went into a besmedish, and the there was no place to learn, which is it was packed with Yidden. So in order to be able to give a share, to have more space, Nafak Yosef Bekarnos, he went outside. Now Rav sat down to teach, and they didn't want him to sit on the ground. And midrabanan, you cannot carry from a Rishus HaYachid into a Carmelist, nor can you carry Daladamis in a Carmelist. So what happened was, isolate Beisadya, they had this mitzia dika, this in between, not too hard, not too soft, felt, and the Talmidim wrapped it to give it to him, and V'lo Yosef, and he didn't sit on it. So people extrapolated, why didn't he sit down? Because he holds, you know how to carry it. It's Mechse Kamasui. And now that's the point. Says the Gemara, you made a wrong inference. Man b'chaza savar, erroneously, mishum the Beisadya aser, and he argues with Shmuel, but he doesn't argue with Shmuel. V'loyi. Rav acheruze machres Beisadya shorim. We have a tradition that Rav announced in public that you are allowed to wear that type of sadya as a beggar and carry it, and it's not called a masur. You know what happened over there? During that lecture, there were kvoid Rabbi Seinu. What's kvoid Rabbi Seinu? So you have two Yidden that were taka, important. They were Talmidim of Rav, but they are called a Talmud Chaved, as we'll explain in a moment. And therefore, Rav had so much cover to them, Rav felt that if they don't have this cushion, then why should I sit under the cushion when they don't? Umanino, who are these Talmidim? Again, they're Talmidei the Rav. They're not Rabbi Seinu of Rav. If not, they would give the lecture. But the Rav was Mechaber them, Rav Kahana and Avasi. Look inside the last Rashi before the Mishnah. Talmidei Chaveirim Hoyuloi. Now, my friends, this takes us to Sanhedrin Daf Lamed Vav. It's very important, this. And we'll better appreciate the term that we use by a Rebbe Mitachosid. Here, the Lashon by Chazal is a Rav and a Talmud. What's a Rav and a Talmud? So in Sanhedrin, we're speaking about a Beis Din, that they're making a vote regarding penalizing someone, and every person's vote counts for one. So the question there is, what happens if you have a father and a son, and the son learned Torah from his father? Or if you have a Talmud that learned the Torah from his Rav, and they both vote the same thing, like if we're speaking there about the capital punishment, they both vote is Chayav Misa. Are we allowed to count them as separate votes? That's a big question. Why not? Because if all the Torah of the Talmud came from the Rav, so how can you count them as a separate number? Okay, you count it out. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says the following, that there's two types of Talmidim. There is a Talmud who is intellectually developed. He's simply lacking information. So the Rav, right, knows the whole Torah Shebal Peh, and he's continuously teaching the Talmidim the laws, the halachas of the Torah. But once the Talmud knows the halachas, the Talmud already is developed enough that he's able to think by himself or for himself. That's called a Talmud Chaver. He's a Talmud, but he's a Chaver. There is where he gets his own vote, because he would be able to vote against the Rav, even though he needed information from the Rav. But once he has the information, but all of the Messiah until that point, now he's on his own. And indeed, the Gemara says, but if a Talmud did not reach that level, then they cannot have their own vote. So that's the word that Rav Kahana and Avasi, they were Taka Talmidim of Rav. They came to his lecture, but Rav considered them to be completely developed. They had their own bina, they had their own way of thinking. And because of that, Rav was mechaber them. They're by themselves. So I remember this whole sugya, a Talmud can be a Talmud and have his own opinion. We say a Rebbe mit a Chassid, because no matter how developed a Chassid is, and a Chassid is developed, the connection that a Chassid has with the Rebbe has to be in such a way that if this is the way the Rebbe thinks, that's the way the Chassid thinks. And Taka, a Chassid mit a Rebbe can never be counted separately, because it's not two votes. This is Lamal Yusuf. We are one vote. We are one voice. All right, Chevra, stop here, God willing. We'll continue the Mishnah in the next year. All right, guys, I'm going to get another coffee. Give me a second.
Shkoyach. What's up, Mayan? Nice to see you, bro.
Good morning.
Are you in Bass Lake or are you in Los Angeles?
On my way back.
All right. Good stuff. That's it. Now this is the last 10 DAF. The final 10. Okay, this is 12 lines from the bottom. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem Zayin. We left off on Daf Kuf Mem Vav Amid Beis by the Mishnah, 12 lines before the bottom of the Amid. However, we are learning now in the Mishnah regarding storing things in a pit to keep them cool. There's a chiddush, but nonetheless that we are allowed to do it. Like we mentioned in the intro of the prior share, here we'll be learning about a person whose garments fell into water, whether there's a fear that people will suspect someone of having laundered their garments or not. We're going to be learning again the concept of kavod abrios. We're going to be learning about marasayin, a machlokes tanoim, whether we say that once there is an issur of marasayin, is that activity asad even b'chadrei chadorim or not. We're going to learn a gavaldik chiddush that even though biblically laundering means washing something with water, what happens if you have garments and there's some dirt on it? Can you clean that dirt off on Shabbos? Rashi holds, machlokes Rashi Tosfos, that if you're makpid, right, you have a dirt on your hat, taking it off is a biblical act of laundering. Wow. And someone else can do the same activity, and if they're not makpid, which means that during the week they would leave that dirt on, they're only taking it off l'kavod Shabbos, then it's permitted to be done. A very interesting concept, a very rare concept, that you can have a certain activity that whether you're violating an Issa Doiraisa or not will depend on how makbid, what kind of clean person you are or not. We're going to be reviewing many dinim that we had in Daf Lametes, Daf Mem, the whole sugya of bathing in hot water on Shabbos, that there was a point that there was an Issa Darabanan, never to bathe in hot water, even lachatchila, even in thermal springs, because the bath house attendants, they would warm up the water on Shabbos, and then people were unable to stand by this gezeda, never to bathe in hot water, so they made it easier. They re-allowed bathing in thermal waters. We're going to be speaking about a person that either bathed the chamik tveri, which is mutter, hot waters, or a person that bathed wrongly, but he already bathed. What about drying yourself? We'll see that there is no issue with drying yourself. What there might be a problem with is that now that you have a towel that's absorbed with water, if you'll be walking it alone, there might be a fear that you will forget and you'll wring the towel out. And this type of gezerah was never imposed on a group of people. So if a group of people are going to the mikvah and they're walking back from the mikvah, and this again will lead us into a topic that we spoke about in the last year of taking, there we spoke about a felt padding. Now we'll speak about a towel that if you wear a towel, derech malbus, you're allowed to wear it from the Rosh Hashanah. And if you're going with a group of people, even if it's dripping wet, we're not afraid that you'll forget and wring it out, which is mamash shchita, because of malabin, because one person reminds the other, versus one walking on their own, even if the towel, according to our sugya, we're not learning Shulchan Aruch, even if the towel is hardly wet, don't carry it, because if it's really wet, you might wring it out, forgetting that it's Shabbos. We're going to be learning whether one is allowed to apply oil on your body, right? The whole issue of, we learned the wax, the memachek, is only when something is more substantial. We're going to be learning about massaging on Shabbos. We're going to be learning about exercising on Shabbos. And finally, with Hashem's help, we'll get to the end of the daf. We'll be learning about this concept, this aruchniistic concept, that excessive involvement in material pleasure, right? It makes us vergrabt, and that has a consequence that we mamish forget our learning. And a very powerful story of the Tanach, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, like the Kamayim HaMizgabim, like the top student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, of what happened with him. And that's the source of what we say in Pirkei Avos, that La'olam, you should be goylul l'mekayim Torah. The source of that statement, the story will be at the end of Kuf Mem Zayin on the base, and a lot more. Let's start again. We're up to Kuf Mem Vav on the base, 12 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Noisnin tafshil l'toy chaboir. You are allowed to place a tafshil, something cooked, inside the pit, in order for it to be shamur. Shamur here doesn't mean shamur from behemoths. They are in the pit more than anywhere else. It should stay cool. They have no refrigeration. So can you put a plate in the bottom of the pit? The Gemara is going to ask Shita. We'll see. No, there's a chiddush here, and we'll see what the chiddush is. But yes, you are allowed. Din number 2. The esamayim hayafin beroyim. It was common that people would take water on Shabbos. You would have a body of water that's outside in summer, the waters are warmish, and that's not geschmack. You want the waters to be cold. You are allowed to take water when we're not speaking about carrying issues, taking water, and the way you will cool it off is that you had in your pit stale, not drinkable waters, but they are cold. So you are allowed to put the warm, fresh waters that's in a cup inside the cold waters. Again, the Gemara is going to ask Pshita. We'll see the Chiddush, but yes, you are allowed. And the third din, if you have cold water and it's winter, you want to have it a bit warmish. We learned all these topics above, right? That Midrash, the whole issue of cooking is only from fire, or remember, tuldas or derivative of fire. Can you warm up something with the sun? Yes. So you can take it out of the pit and you can leave it in the sun. Bishvil sheyechamu. Next, you're traveling and your kalim fell off and they fell into water. They're sopping wet. Says the Mishnah, mahalech behen ve'eino choshesh. Now, what's the chashash? People might think if you will be wearing your garments that you laundered them on Shabbos. So there is a madas ayin aspect. On the other hand, if you will not be allowed to wear them, then you'll be going without garments. Kavod abriyos. Kavod abriyos, wear the garments. But now there's another issue. How can you wear and how can you dry them? So says the Mishnah, the moment you are out of the visuals of the people, you are in your home, even in the outermost part of your courtyard, there you are allowed to spread it out in the sun in order to dry them. Again, we're not afraid that people are going to think that you wash them because no one can see them. But drying them up in a place where everyone can see that your garment is being dried, there is a chashash, marasayin, or people will be choishesh, it's not marasayin, people will have a chashash that you laundered your clothing on Shabbos. Now, just many details to this, because this is really halacha l'maisa. Does it not happen to many of us that when we walk in the rain and you come home and you want to put your raincoat, you throw it on something? So just to make one important limitation, as most accept all the way in halacha l'maisa, that hanging up a wet garment, the issue, whether you have to make sure people don't see it or we don't care if people see it, is only if you are hanging it up on a location that it is there that you hang up laundered garments. So in Brazil, right, until very recently, they had no idea what a dryer means. So you wash your garments, and everyone had these lines, and Eretz Yisrael, right, Lahavdil. So you have these, you go to Me'ashadim, and you have these lines everywhere, and people are hanging up their garments. That's an area where everyone hangs up wet clothing to dry. That's what we're speaking about. If you hang up garments, Shabbos, on such a, a clothing line, there's a possibility that people will be choishes that you washed it. If you are hanging it on your door or on some place on your marpeset where you would never hang laundered clothing, according to all the poskim, that's not a problem, even if people see that. Okay, but the Mishnah says that if you're doing it inside your yard, no one sees, there's no problem. So let's start. So first of all, the first thing in the Mishnah, like we mentioned, I can put a cooked dish inside the pit. Pshita, what's the problem? Says the Gemara, that migzar mishum ashwei guma, it's mamash gavaldik. You have a plate, you're putting it in a pit. If the floor of the pit is not straight, then the plate won't sit normal. It's gonna sit tilted, and the food might roll off. You would think that Chazal would be geyser. Maybe not. Maybe you're going to end up straightening out the floor. That's the chiddush that we don't have that chashash. Next, the Mishnah. Mishnah says that you can put good waters, if the good waters came from an exposed area where it's warmish, and you want to cool it off. So you can put it inside waters, the waters that are stagnant, you're not going to drink, but they are very cold. You can put this into that. Again, Pshita, so well, you're right. Where do you think those cold waters were? They were inside a pit. This is leading up to the Seifam, that if you have waters that are in a pit, not stagnant waters, cold waters, and now you want to bring them out in the heat, that's the chiddush that you can take them out the cham. This is also pshita. No. I know that what? That cooking is only ba'oid uber tulda so'ur. But you know what a tulda of ur is? An emetz. Once you see people starting to warm up stuff on Shabbos, they might end up burying it in warm ashes, and ashes that became hot from fire, even if though it became hot from fire from before Shabbos, that's taka aser. Kamash Malon, that we don't make such gezeiros, that we are allowed to warm things up in the sun. Then the Mishnah went to a whole different topic. Misha Nashru, right, your kalim fell into garments. So this is a statement we had before. That don't say that it's only because of Maras Ayin, and if no one is going to see, I'm good to go. No. Once they said it's Asur, even in a room, it's in a room. No one will see. And right away, they challenged it up. Our Mishnah clearly doesn't subscribe to that. It says in our Mishnah, right, what's the issue? Someone is going to be choishish that you laundered your garments on Shabbos if you're going to sell this. Walking in the street, covered up. Hanging them up depends. In your yard, yeah, because people cannot see it. Keneged ha'am, no. Clear, there's a difference. Avalei keneged ha'am. Does this mamish not refute Rav? The Gemara says you're right. Our Mishnah certainly does not agree to that. Our Mishnah does differentiate whether you are in public, and there is a de facto madasayin, or whether you are in private. I Rav Tanoi, the Tanya on this that shoichtan b'chama avalei keneged ha'am. That's our Mishnah. However, the Tanach Rabbi Lazar and the Tanach Rabbi Shimon, they both hold that it is asur, gewaldig. Why is it asur? Anywhere. Afilu b'chadri chadarim. What should you do? Like I said, halacha l'maisa, hang it up b'chadri chadarim, or even in public, on something that you never hang laundered garments. Which is what we need to do. Like, what am I going to do if I have a raincoat that's wet? What I can't. What should I put it on the floor? Hang it up, hang it up on a place that you can only do at Shabbos when it's wet. Amar Afuna, have a DAF Kuf Mem Zayin, top of the Amid. Wow, this is gavaldik. Hamanayir talesi b'Shabbos. If you shake out your talis on Shabbos, what are you shaking it out from? Guys, look inside the top of Rashi. This is huge. Rashi says min ha'afar. It's dirty because there's dust on it. Look inside the top Tosfos. Completely disagrees with that. What's on top of your talis? Tal. A little bit of liquid. Which is, now that we're learning the sugya of libun and we're learning about the sugya d'oraisa, it must be that it's wet. And he says, and it can be the way Rashi says, because if there is dust on the garment, even if you're cleaning it, Rabbeinu Hanano, it's for sure not connected to Shabbos. Because libun, according to Rabbeinu Hananel, is only if it's wet. The problem with Rashi is, and that's the Rabbi Kiva Eger over here, is that Rashi just recently, that Kuf Mem Aleph, Amad Aleph, also says that biblically, libun only means when it's wet. So it's a big stira, b'shitas Rashi. But let's learn the DAF over here. Rashi says, Hamanayel Talesoi Min Ha'afer. Look inside the Gemara, Yechayev Chatos. This huge, guys, I know, the hats, this is, you have a little bit of dust and you're brushing it off. According to this, you're Chayev Chatos. However, now comes the limitations. Your garments are new. So therefore, it's about how much does it bother you. It's amazing. If the garments to begin with are old, even though you're dusting, let's go to Rashi, you're taking off the schmutz, you're not chayiv chatas. Furthermore, even if the garment is new, it's only if it's black. But if the garments are anything other than black, the other colors that we have, remember by the tachrichen, what were the options? White, black, red. Here also. But if they're white or they're besumke, leis lamba. And even if they're black and even if they're new, it's only if you're makbet. Guys, makbet, hold on. Why are you taking it off if you're not makbet? I'll tell you. Makbet means you're makbet even during the week. If during the week you don't care if there's some dust on your head. Well, kavod Shabbos kodesh, you're cleaning it. That's not called makbet. Not that you're makbet. It doesn't bother you. In order for you to give kavod for Shabbos, you want your garments to be perfectly clean. If that's the case, then again, it's not a problem. And you know what not a problem means? Remember we learned just recently that normally we don't go from a isur d'oraisa to muter. If you're not makbid, then it's muter lechatchila. It's min hakotze el hakotze. And the stories. Ula ikla lepumpadis. And he saw that the chevron pumpadis or chazer rabbanon, the common nap say glimayu, that on Shabbos there would be a shaking off their coats from dust. Amar, he says, Ribono shel olam k'machal rabbanon shtapsa. Isur d'oraisa. Amalahu Rabbi Yehuda told the chevra, shake it off in his face. It's mutter lechatchila because anam lekavdin and nida. Now, why were they shaking it off? Again, they were doing Yelakava Shabbos. But since we don't care that if in the week, now we learned before a grease stain on a garment is mamash. What was the chayiv misa? But that's not a grease stain. This is some dust. Also heard this the Hasidic word. This is only that if a Talmud Chacham only has one grease stain, is chayiv misa. Only he should be so mufshad from Gashma, you shouldn't notice it. But that's not. You have to be very clean. But coming back over here, this clean from oil, this clean from grease, this clean from your breakfast, and then there's dust. Mamash today, they're black hats. This is mamash a real. Can you dust it off? Another story. Abaya Hava Koi Kamed Rabbi Yosef. Now, Rabbi Yosef was the Rebbe of Abaya. Amalei, the Rebbe tells his Talmud, or maybe his Chassid, as we spoke out, please, Havali Kum To'i. That means, give me my hat. Now, Chazah, Abaya saw on Shabbos, the Iki, Tala, Alei, that there is some tal, even the Rabbeinu Hanan, there's some moisture, and he didn't know he was stuck, because what am I going to do? To give my Rebbe a dirty hat? How can I give my Rebbe a dirty hat? To clean my Rebbe's hat on Shabbos, it's Chilul Shabbos. So he didn't know until he got stuck. He was trapped. He couldn't give it to him. And Rabbi Yosef sensed that. Now, by the way, Rabbi Yosef was also Saginar. Could be he felt it from him. So Amalei, no, he realized what's happening. The foods, should they shuckle it out, take out the dirt. Anam, like Abdin and Mida, I don't care about it at all. Now here you see something very important. L'chura Abaya would care. Abaya would care. Makes sense. Abaya was not blind. Rabbi Yosef, well, you're blind. He didn't care. So if I'm shaking off your garment, if I'm not makbid, but you are makbid, or vice versa, l'chura, the story, this additional story is telling you, is being mechadesh. It's about who is going to wear it. It's not about who's doing it. It's the wearer's kapeda that will determine the definition of that act. And this is very big. Speak about Isa Dairaisa versus Tumut Lachadchil. Says the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Going me'ingen le'ingen. And guys, yeah, we learned this in the last DAF, and as we'll learn over here about carrying towels, there's carrying and there's wearing, right? Masoi Malbush. So if you're going with a talus, and listen, maybe Rabbi Steinsaltz make pictures. It sounds like this. There is my talus. There is the end of the back of the talus, which is what we're talking about. If that's folded up all the way on my shoulders. So something that's normally worn when it's completely out, if I took the entire bottom and I put it on my shoulders, this, he holds, renders, that's not the way you wear the talus. The talus is worn when it's rolled out. Now you're carrying it, and you're chayiv chatas. Tanya nami achi. And Soich Ksus is people who want to sell garments. They want to make sure the garments are not dirty. So when they go out, again, the bottom is completely folded and all the way up on their shoulders, the chayiv chatas. And really, says the Braisa, it's not only for people who sell shchayda. Anyone who wears his or her talus in a way that they're picking up, they're folding it completely. It's not called, you can't say that's not the way people wear it. It's not derech malbush, so it becomes a masuk. He's giving this as a mashal because this is what they did, even during the week. And it doesn't make it into a malbush. No, they were selling merchandise, so to make sure it doesn't get dirty, they wouldn't wear it. They would carry it, but it's called carrying. And therefore, same thing. This is part of the Braisa. That the chenvini hayoytze b'mois hatzurur loy b'sedinoi. He doesn't have money in a purse. He would take the edge of his talus and he would wrap the money in there. He would wrap it up. So just because it's wrapped in the even though he did it during the week, it doesn't make it into an act of malbush. You're not wearing coins. And indeed, next case, here, so Ratanim, around 10 lines from the top, Rashi, it's a name of a place. People from Hartanim. Tosfos says Haratanim means Ratanim Kimoi Harhatanim. People who hurry. The the hurriers, yoitzen b'sudar and sha'al kasveim. A sudar, we already learned recently, it means a kerchief, but it was that which they used for a turban. So the turbans were not the way we see the picture of the Rambam. It's the turban that both ends of the garment would flow down on your shoulders. And here again, what happens if you fold it up a little bit? And why would one fold it up? If it was hanging loose and you're rushing, then the back would be flapping in the air. It would somehow disturb you. Rolling it up doesn't allow the wind to blow it. It helped you hurry. That's the Tosfos. So there, they are allowed to put those edges of the garments on their shoulders, not allowing it to roll down. By the talis, that's the nakud of the whole sugi. It's hard to chop exactly. When you have a talis that covers your whole garment, your whole body, and it goes in the back all the way down to your ankles, and you're folding it up, that's already called a masui. But when you have a sudir and you have a little bit of a shawl that goes a little bit over your shoulders, and then you just roll it up a little bit, that's okay. And the way Ella kol adam, that if you take the sudir, the edges of your turban, and you roll them up a little bit, that is okay. We're just mentioning ratanim because that's the way they went. And again, darkei bekach doesn't mean it's a malbush. Like we mentioned, when soicher shviz, when soicher yeschayra go out with their talesais folded up, it doesn't mean that that's called a malbush. That it was a masui. When you do business, you're carrying a masui. He's just speaking about these, certain people did it, so he's attributing that custom accordingly, but it goes to everyone. Says the Gemara, right, guys, we're learning a Tanach, we're learning a Brayso. Amer Rabbi Yehuda, my Siba Horkanos B'nai Shal Rabbi Elazar Ben Horkanos, Sheyatza B'Suda Shal Ksefim B'Shabbos. However, he was rushing. So first of all, he folded up the edges so it shouldn't be flapping in the wind. On top of that, he was afraid that still it might get blown off his head. And he was afraid that if it gets blown off his head, he'll forget, he'll pick it up. So you know what was the solution? So he had one thread that he wrapped around his finger. If it's going to get blown off, it's going to sort of say, get caught by his finger. Here he wasn't afraid that he's going to keep on carrying it. That would be a reminder that he has to stop and put it back on before he goes weiter. And you don't even need that. They were not afraid that if it falls off your head, you're going to end up picking it up and carrying it. And guys, this doesn't go to everything. What we learned earlier on when it comes to women's jewelry, here we're speaking about a hat, that if your hat gets blown off, a yid goes with a hat. So they're not afraid you're going to walk with it. It will get blown off and you'll put it back on. It's interesting. Our Lubavitcher hats, right? They have this string. I wonder why it was there originally for. With a button. I think it was made to put into the lapel. Who knows? I think there is something that they made in the hats that if it gets blown off, it should get caught on your garment. The big Mevinim.
It's meant to put in your collar, in your button, in your lapel.
Put in the hole in the without those. To
catch it in a wind. To catch it in the wind.
We're not afraid that if your hat gets blown off, you're going to pick it up and carry it. Yes, when it comes to a hat, that's the key. It's not that the sudar went all the way down to the ground, so when you fold it up, your mom is carrying half of your bag. It would go a little bit down. It would go down halfway your back. And that, folding it up, is not called a maso. It's still considered derech malbush. Okay. Says the Gemara Vayt. Ula ikla lebein Abasi Barini. And he went to the yeshiva there. Bominei, and Ula asked of the chavre there. So these talisais went all the way down to the ground. And today it's called a cuff, right in the bottom of your pants. That's the marzei fear. They would have, for people that were a little bit short, so they would have a standard size talis. So they would fold up the talis all the way in the ground. It shouldn't touch the ground. It's all about not getting dirty. But it wasn't just how would it stay. So there were certain types of threads that were there in the lower part of the talis that you would, so to say, tie it on. And that would actually create a thing called a cuff. You would make a cuff. Can you make such a cuff? And they call that a gutter because it's like a gutter where rain gets caught. Amalahu, Haraloi, also lasses Marziv Shabbat. My Marziv, what is this? Amar Abzedam, he's saying Babyliyasam, these cuffs that the Babylonians would make. And what would, by the way, what would be the Isser? Guys, the Isser would be MERCAVA Patish again. The Isser would be MERCAVA Patish because if, let's say, this is the style, if this is the way you wear the garment, and therefore it has a lot to do with your kavanah, and that will be the Hemshech HaDvarim. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yasakwe, Rabbi Zedom, and Amalei, Hachimai means, again, Hachimai means the Gemara didn't even write down the exact question. Because just like we're learning about the Marzev, it's hard to get the right picture. I think I understand Ravina and Avashi felt that they cannot exactly ask the question. He showed him a certain type of folding over the garment. Is this type okay? Amalei Yasir. V'hachimai, isn't this amazing? What about that? Amalei Yasir. You can argue, why did they even put it in the Gemara? I think it's to make it clear that we should know that we don't fully know what they're talking about. We're trying to get to Sfaris, but the exact Metzias here, without a picture notes, if there would be a picture, maybe in Astamit, someone who knows more, maybe there was pictures. Maybe he drew a picture of Hachi Azafal. I don't know where else we have such a thing. It's amazing that the Gemara is recording Akasha without even explaining the question. We're speaking about folding the garments in the bottom in a way that it doesn't get dirty. The issue is, let's go with Rashi, whether it's MERCAVA Patish or not, but he's not even telling you exactly what, is this okay? No. Is that okay? No.
Rabbi, there's no sewing involved here, right? It's just folding it up. That's all they're doing?
No. There was temporarily making a kesher she'eina kayama l'chayra. If it would be a kesher shel kayama, then it would be awesome. There was a certain amount of fixing it. They affixed it. Think about it. If you have a talus, how can I fold over my talus? It's going to right away fall down. I get it on my shoulders, but to flap it up, there was something that they did. And that's the key. See, that's why you don't have to write the exact place. He's giving you the way of thinking, the approach. Nekoit hai klal biyot. Kol adata delichanufei. Now you have to know the taich. So Rashi taiches. Chanufei means mesukin tamid. Chanufei means you're gathering. But if your intent of gathering up, making this a fold, making this marzeif is permanent, that's the key. That is where it's also called the lihisnaois. Rashi says 23 lines on the top of the Amid. Lefisha, that's the taich. I know it means you're just doing it to make it more attractive, but it's not just that. The key, according to Rashi, is this type of finalizing the appearance of the garment. Now you made the cuff. Is it permanent or is it temporary? Taich Rashi. If it's temporary, then it's shari. Then it's mutter. Hiha, the Rav Shisha, the Rei, the Rav Ida, that Mishnah b'sadinoi hava. He only did it to make it look more beautiful, and therefore, since for him it was temporary, he did it lachatchila on Shabbos. Gevaldik. All right.
Is this all their pleats like we have today? Pleats.
Yeah, pleats. It's either very good. Pleats goes vertically, right? It's either pleats or cuffs. Mamash with you that it's very good. All right. Piyasa Abdimi Yama. Pamachas Yotza Rabbi Lasoda. And Vahoyo Shnei Tzidei Talesi Menachem Sefer. Now that's not what we spoke about before. Here it's clear. Before we spoke about you took the back. Think about your talus gadol on Shabbos. You didn't take the part that's by your legs and fold it over your shoulders. That's awesome. That we said already. But here he spoke about the sides. So they used to wear the sides of the talesois more on their arms. Today we have sleeves. They didn't have sleeves. So they would leave the talesois open. Rabbi was once walking and he rolled it up the way we roll up the talus. Not to confuse it, because here much less is resting on your shoulder. You have what's going on over here. It's not that the whole talus is folded over. Only that which is on your arms, that's Rabbi rolled up. So Amal Afan of Yeshua ben Zerus, who is the son of the Chamev of Rav Meir, right, the son of Rav Meir's father-in-law, that the Zul Echiv Rav Meir Chatos. No, this is called carrying. So he challenged Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So Amalei, Rabbi tells him, Digdik Rav Meir Akan. This is what he was medagdik for. No, he was medagdik if you take the bottom of the talus and you throw it on your shoulders. That's called carrying. But if it's simply rolling up, it's like if a person walks today with their shirt and they roll up their sleeves a few times. That's not called carrying. That's what Rabbi responded. Nevertheless, since someone criticized Rabbeinu HaKadosh because that person viewed it as an act of chilul, shul Rabbi Talisai, he accepted it and he unrolled it. He was mishalshel it, chained it down, and they have another version with someone else. That ki asad of an amar, that the one who challenged Rabbeinu HaKadosh was not Yeshua ben Zerus, but it was Yeshua ben Kusvoi, who is the chaysan shel Rabbi Akiva. Guys, this means the son-in-law of Rabbi Akiva. That again, that Omar, he tells Rebbe, Bezu leichiv Rabbi Akiva chatos, and the same answer. Amalei, Rebbe tells him, no, dik Rabbi Akiva atan, not this. This rolling up is okay. Nevertheless, once there's a criticism, shil Rebbe Talisa. There's so many Hasidic stories of that. I think one of our Rabbeim, they used to eat the moyach of an animal, and someone told them, doesn't it say that it's kosher l'shikha? Like the Rebbe Rashab didn't know that. Once you do something, if someone criticizes it, even if it's 100% mutter, there's a madrega, from then on he stopped doing it. And now
like the Rebbe with Benedictine. Remember the Rebbe used to drink Benedictine, then he stopped?
Very good.
The matzah ball on Pesach.
He also had Shmuel Bar Rabbi Yehuda Amar that the Bechlal Rebbe never went with the stylus that way. A different story. What happened was someone asked Rebbe, "Can you fold the talus on your shoulder, from the sleeves on your shoulder?" And the same thing. Rebbe said, "Yeah." But when Rebbe said, "Yeah," someone else says, "But didn't so and so say no?" So Rebbe says, "Don't do it." Okay, it's getting late. Let's go back. As we mentioned in the intro, guys, Daf Mem, Bekitzer, that Chazal asered us bathing in hot water. They had that whole sugya there. And really, initially, the issue was even in naturally warm springs. Then they were matter that. And in the times of Chazal, it always remains mutter to bathe in cold water. There is a minhag now that we don't bathe in cold water. What about showering in hot water? We had a machlekes tanoim. All of this will be reviewed. So says the Mishnah. Meimara means that they used to take waters, they warmed them up before Shabbos. They didn't want for the warmth to dissipate, so they would put it in a ma'ara. When you put it in a closed room, it stays warmer longer. Guys, bathing in this water is asa midrabanan. Again, we are not allowed to bathe in warm water. All right, even though it wasn't warmed on Shabbos. Horoichitz means that's a lashon. If someone did it, you violated, or you went lachatchila and make tevelia. We'll see a diuk more in the Gemara about this. 2 examples. The bottom line of the Mishnah is we're not speaking about the bathing. We're speaking about what should you do with the towel after you used it. What's the issue? Let's read it inside. Like the Mishnah, and after you bathed in this tapeg and you dried yourself, even if you, as I'm a funik, you didn't use 1 towel, you used 10 aluntiyois. That means 10 towels, which means that each towel is barely wet. Nevertheless, you may not carry the towel with your hand. We're not speaking about issues of carrying. There's no haitzah here. It's an amrishus. What's the issue? That's the issue. Chazal were afraid that if you are by yourself, you might habitually wring out the towel, which was the common. They didn't have dryers then. That was the normal thing. Before you would hang it up on the line, you would wring it out. Wringing out a towel with water is mamish schita tulda of malabi. However, that's only if you are by yourself. Abo, even if you have 10 people that are mistapkin baluntas achas, chasidish and mikvah, 1 towel for 10 people, which means after the 10th guy used it, the 10th guy got more wet from using it. The towel is azoim saturated with the heilige mikvah water. So this is mamish wet. If they're walking together, and if the mistapik penei midei meragleim, says the Mishnah, mevi'in oisin biyodin, they are allowed to carry it. Why? Because when people are together, that's the power of a group. If one will forget and start ringing it, the other chavod is going to remind him. More in the Gemara. Next case in the Mishnah. Sachin umemashmishin. You are allowed to be sach with oil, not memachek because it's already liquidy, this cream, and you are allowed to massage your body, but aboloi misamlin, one taich is you can't massage it very, very vigorously, A whole other way of learning the Mishnah is, means you cannot do a lot of exercise on Shabbos to start schwitzing, because that brings us into the Shchikas Samamonim Isur Midrabanan. And finally, the loim is gutted and you may not scrape your skin. That was part of the massage. Let's learn the Mishnah with a keli. Why not? Because it's called Uvda Dachol. Okay, next in the Mishnah. Ein Yardim le Kurdima. Kurdima is a certain river. And as the Gemara will explain, it was very slippery there. And it was almost certain that if you're going to go there, you're going to slip. If you're going to slip, your garments will get filled with water. After the fact, we learned in the previous Mishnah, Kavod Abrias, don't take it off. But there was still a fear that if you know for sure that deer or 99 or 90% your garments are going to get wetted, you might end up wringing it out. We don't want you to do that. Next thing in the Mishnah, it's miscellaneous. The ein oisen apiktivizin. Apiktivizin, my friends, is a composite of apik, tvei, zon. The Romans, Megushim, they ate and they ate. They wanted to eat more. So what did they do? They would drink some sort of potion that would make them vomit out their food in order for there to be more place, right? It took out the additional food. So you're not allowed to take that apiktivizin on Shabbos. Another din, you may not straighten out the limbs of an infant. Again, more details of that we had before. There's two types of wrapping. There's wrapping a baby when it's born. We'll see that's mutter. But then if the baby taka needs to have a refuah, obviously there's no pikuach nefesh. So once it becomes overly therapeutic and you're fixing something that's broken, that's the isur of refuah on Shabbos. Likewise, if you have a broken bone and you want to set it, well, we know this even from today, you can wait a little bit of time, don't do that on Shabbos. If you have something that became, let's say, dislocated, and their solution then was that they would put a lot of cold water on it. So can you put that limb in cold water? No. However, you can bathe your entire body in cold water, because since people would bathe, like we mentioned in the times of Chazal, bathing in cold water was done, then even though you are doing it to fix your limb, it's not mechsel refuah. Only the limb. Yeah, also your entire body. And if in the srapa, because there is no mechsa that you did a dafka for therapeutical purposes. Okay, let's start case by case. So the Mishnah is a gavaldik idea. The Mishnah began with the words haroichitz, the meima'ara, ubemei tveria. Kutani meima'ara. Dumiyah the mei tveria. L'chora, ma mei tveria chamin. Af meima'ara. We're speaking about the waters that are in the cave. Why did you put it in the cave? Because they were warm. And on that says the Mishnah haroichitz, which is taka to teach you, as we learned, only you can only bathe in Meitveria, thermal springs, in waters that were warmed through fire, even Erev Shabbos, bathing in them on Shabbos is also. Now, my friends, let's make another deal. This is Mamash building the whole building. That if we're speaking about showering your body in hot water that was warmed up from before Shabbos, diuk upon diuk upon diuk, which is, why did the Mishnah have to speak about Meitveria? First, Meitveria is mentioned to be megale, that name ma'ara means hot water. And the Mishnah dafka uses the words of b'di'evet. And the key is to be medayik from the, when is it b'di'evet? Only if you're bathing. But if you're showering, then it's mutter. And indeed, as we learned, just to remember that not everyone allows you to shower in hot water. And that's so therefore our Mishnah, Mani, can only be Rabbi Shimon. The time, as we learned in the Braisa, rinsing your entire body, that means what we call a shower, is also, that's Rav Meir, the most chamerdik thing. Rabbi Shimon is matter both in hot and in cold. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, depends, cold, yeah, hot, not. Our Mishnah again is somehow being merames, not somehow, it's being merames that only bathing in hot water is the b'di'eved, but in showering is even lachatchila, and that is the shita of Rab Shem. Okay, but the Mishnah is not here to teach you about the issue of bathing or showering in hot water, but the point of the Mishnah is whether we are afraid that you will inadvertently, you'll forget and you'll wring out the towel filled with water. So says the Mishnah that if you are by yourself, even if minastapek, which means each towel is barely wet. You're not allowed to carry it. However, if 10 people use the same towel, then they could, and the Gemara says that both of them have a Gavaldik Chiddush. Reisha Revusa Kumash Malon and the Sefer Revusa Kumash Malon. Reisha Revusa Kumash Malon, Afilu Hani, the Levin Fisher Maya, even if you use 10 towels, which means neither of them have a lot of water in them, keep them the Chadu since you're only one person. Nevertheless, there is the phrase that also they schitom, and on the other hand, the Sefer Revusa Kumash Malon, that Afilu Hani, the Fisher Maya, 10 people used one towel. This towel is underpacked with Vaser. Given that as long as people are carrying the towel together, the beauty of a rabbin is matkei ahadodi. They will remind each other not to squeeze it out, not to wring it out on Shabbos. Says the Gemara on the Rabbanon, that if you went to a bathhouse, let's speak about cold water, which is mutalachatchila, and you took a bath, don't take the towel home with you. DAF can leave it over there in the window. Right, again, you might wring it out. We're not speaking about carrying in a way that you could carry it. We're afraid you're going to wring it out. However, they are the biggest troublemakers. Don't give it to the bathhouse attendants. Don't even give it to them because they might wring it out. Shimon disagrees with all of this, and he holds that mistapik balontas achas, even if you only used one towel, meaning it's very wet, he argues with our Mishnah, and he holds that only via biyodoi l'toich beisoi. See, gotta learn the Gemara. He brings another Tanach that disagrees, and he does not subscribe b'chlal to such a gezerah.
Rabbi, these bathhouse attendants, they're Jews or non-Jews? Non-Jews, no?
We just spoke about that before. Like so there was one shita that said they were not Jewish or they were Jewish. This is their way of making a living. And other people would come bathe, and they have to have enough dry towels. And
so that's a Amir L'Nachri issue?
I think we mentioned that above. And DAF Mem, we have to go back to DAF Mem. But let's learn the Pshat. No, they're not going. If you have dysfunctioning and you run out of towels, then you're out of business. It's bad for your reputation. So we were cautious that they're going to be Machal Shabbos. Okay. Now that we heard this new Shita, so now Abaye asks his Rebbe, Hilchas Amai, right? So Rabbi Yosef tells him, Amalei, that since this isn't only Reb Shimon, but it's Reb Shimon, and it's Rabbi, and it's Shmuel, and it's Rabbi Yochanan, all of them allow, so therefore we're going to pass the light. So Reb Shimon, Hadam clear, Abrais, Rabbi, the Tanya, that Kishayin will make them play the Eitzel Reb Shimon, it's amazing. Rabbi is back to Reb Shimon. But the fact that Rabbi is sharing a story of what happened when he was a yeshiva bachur, and he was learning by Reb Shimon in Turkaya, and the minig of the Rebbe, he was quoting what Reb Shimon did. Rebbe quoting the story means Rebbe agrees to that. If you remember, we had this above, that Reb Shimon holds that even if you did not make an Eiru, as long as an article did not begin from the outset of Shabbos Babayis, carrying it from my chutzner to your gag, to your karpef, all these reshuyos hayachid were not included in the Takanas Chachamim of making Eruvin. So there, in Turkaya, he wanted to bathe in cold water on Shabbos. And he would ask his Talmidim, and like Tosfos points out, Talmidim are not allowed to go with the Rebbe when the Rebbe goes to bathe. But on the other hand, Rav Shimon would not go by himself. So there was one Talmud that went with him. And he would not be mamish present because he cannot watch his Rebbe bathing. So after Rav Shimon bathed himself, there was that one long Talmud that would carry back the towel. So he would go, and that Talmud would carry back his Rebbe, Rav Shimon's towel back by himself. So again, I know this is Rav Shimon, but the fact that the Rebbe is quoting the story indicates that Rebbe is also subscribing to this lenient opinion. Shmuel, the Amar of Yidam Shmuel, Mistapik, Adam Ba'aluntis, Umevia Biyadalitech. Beisoi, Biyadi, where there's an Eruv, and Rabbi Yochanan, here we'll have a controversy. The Amar of Chia Barav, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha, Mistapik, Adam Ba'aluntis, Umevia Biyadalitech. Beisoi, frankly, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hachi, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha, Kistam Mishnah. And in our Mishnah, that was the whole Kiddush that Abaye, before he heard from Rabbi Yosef, never even knew that there's a machlokes. Our Mishnah writes, V'lo Yevi and Biyadai. So says the Gemara, no, Rabbi Yochanan had a different girsa in our Mishnah. He learned the Mishnah concluding with the words that Divrei ben Chachinoi. Our Mishnah was not a Stam Mishnah. Rabbeinu HaKadosh quoted this Das Yachid Fakert because Rebbe, like we just quoted above, by the fact that he related the minig of his teacher, Reb Shimon, and what happened when he learned, and I'll tell him how one Talmud went with his Rebbe on Shabbos to bathe. So it's not only about the issue of Reb Shimon L'Shitasi, that there is no issue of carrying from one Ishus HaYachid to another without an Eruv, but it's also about he had to carry everything back, and that included the carrying the one towel back. Says the Gemara, Ha'ul Yarin Mevi'in Balorei Nashim Lebeit Banei. They are allowed to bring towels, right, that women use to the bathhouse. In other words, women would bathe. Women would bathe with cold water. And they can carry towels. Now here, we're not speaking about carrying wet towels. Here we're speaking about another issue. When there is no Eruv, that was the issue. You can't dry out towels, like even in our homes. Why do people run out of the whole time? There's no more towels, no more towels. So they can take towels. If you transform the towel into a malbush, like we learned in the last DAF, there we learned about felt. Here we're learning about a towel. If you make your towel into into a scarf, that's the way we did it in yeshiva. You wrap it around your neck, then you're not called carrying. Beautiful. Next, sechanisa. Sechanisa is some sort of shmata that people would put over their heads after the bath. The Sfardish that were afraid of a wind. They don't want to get, so they wanted to cover their hair. So here again, this is okay. This is a towel that you put on your head after a bath. It's not called a masui, it's a malbush. But here there was a fear that the wind will blow it off. And unlike a hat that we mentioned above, that you would put it back on your head, this is not a hat. This is only something that you wear when your hair is wet. Maybe by the time the wind blows it off, your hair is not that wet. So here we are afraid that you're going to carry it. So therefore, you have to tie the two ends of the garment in a way that even if the wind will blow it off, it's not going to completely fly it off and you won't end up carrying it. And Amar Rab Chia, Amar Rab Yechon, where should you tie it? Lamata, Mikasmayim, somewhere under the shoulders. That is the effective place of tying it, and not in another place where there it would not be that effective and the wind indeed will blow it off. He was the Rabbi that Kimavrisu Mani Levechela, they were sometimes obligated by the law of the government, of the Babylonian government, that when there were soldiers stationed outside the city, they were obligated to bring provisions to the soldiers. And again, Chil carrying Shabbos, so the same concept, that when you carry garments to soldiers, you should make sure that mamash behemshach to what we learned before, have them hang down. If they're too folded, then we're carrying a garment, but we're wearing it, it should be a malbush. You have to have it flowing, because the less flowing, the more folded, it might be the more convenient, but it's a masui. So you take a towel, make sure you wear it like a scarf. And there is a certain fine line where, no, that's called carrying it, and that's not good. All right, moving on to the other inyan. It says in the Mishnah that sachin, you can apply oil to your body on Shabbos, and you can massage your body, not with the keli, not with the scraper, but with your hand. So, says the Gemara, Taman Abanan. Now, guys, here we're going into uvda d'choil. And shinuyim that you have to make, it should not be uvda d'choil. Taman Abanan sachin u'mamashmishin b'vnei ma'ayin. If a person has their stomach areas, it needs to be massaged, you can do it. However, because if you'll massage your stomach with oil, the way you do it on the weekday, you'll be violating the Rabbanan of Uvda d'choil. So how should you do it? In other words, the Gemara is asking, what's the unusual way? So now you have to know what the minig of the usual way is. So that's a machlokes. So Rav Chama Bar Chanina says, in according to Rav Chama Bar Chanina, the normal seder was first they massaged, and after the massage, they would apply oil. So to do it unusual, you got to do the opposite. First apply the oil and then massage. Rabbi Yechanan, no. Rabbi Yechanan holds that applying oil and massaging never has a seder. Elamah, the norm was to do one after the other. Either one, but never together. So the only way you can effectively do it, bishinoi, is by doing it together. That's the only shina that you can do. Then the Mishnah says, Abolim amlin. So either that refers to the way you're massaging, or like we mentioned, many of the Rishonim learned that's the Mishnah that you can't do a lot of exercise. But let's go back to the way you can't massage in a more koyachtik way. Regarding that, regarding again healing, what's the issue? It's about refuah. So he says, Asur la'amid b'karkiyasa shall be yoises. Here we start the yoises. The yoises, my friend, is a certain river in Eretz Yisrael, somewhere in Yehuda, that had a muddy, salty floor. And when you would stand there, it would mamish heal you. So you cannot go to those rivers on Shabbos. Why, says Rabbi Yechanan? Mipnei sheme'ameles. It would somehow make you schwitz, and therefore umerapen. The salt, the mud, would remedy you. And here, details. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. I want you to know that this type of salty mud only gave you enough healing for you to aser it midrabanan only in a certain time in the year. Kol Yimei Shel Yoimsis was only 21 days. Only during 21 days in the year do we say that those rivers and the mud and the salt, they gave you azoifil refuah that it becomes aser. And what part of the year? He didn't give an exact date. All he said was va'atzeres minami. It's around Shavuos time. So now they wanted to know. Let's narrow this down. Atzeres lahaygisa lahaygisa. Is Shavuos the beginning of the 21 days? Is it the end of the 21 days? Maybe it's in the middle of the 21 days. Tashema, Amashmuel, we had above regarding the sugya of shakiyame, all these healing drinks. So remember Shmuel says that all of the drinks that people drink with the are the most effective, midifcha, from the carbon, from Pesach, until Atzeres, early spring. So l'choda, just like drinking something is the most effective therapeutically during the early spring, so then the isur of standing in the demiosis, which we're limiting it for 21 days, is that it ends with Shavuos. We're going earlier. So Sagmar says, no, not a proof. There, when it comes to drinking, there maybe the cooler the weather, the more effective the therapy that comes from drinking. But over here, the therapy comes from schwitzing, and therefore called the chamim alma tfei ma'ali. Perhaps the hotter, the more therapeutical. So maybe Atzeres is the beginning of 21 days. So we didn't clarify exactly when, but the concept is, don't go there on Shabbos. Now, says the Gemara, Amar Chelboy, Chamra de Frugisa, the special wine of a place called Prugisa. That was very, very good wine. And Umaya, the Dimyoises and the waters of these rivers, which are very geschmack, in other words, we're speaking about overly indulging in Gashmias, that is something that Kipchu Aseres Shvatim Yisrael. It's because of this, says Rashi, that they were lost. Wow. Kipchu means that they became deprived. And like Rashi says, Shohoyu Bali Hanoah, Va'asukin Bekach, and therefore V'lohoyu Oiskin Batoira, and V'yotzu L'tanu B'Yisrael. And now comes a mice. A very powerful story. Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. But guys, don't forget, right, in Pirkei Avos, Perik Sheni, we just went to Shabbos, Chamish Talmidim Ha'il Rechem and Zakai. One of them was Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. He was the Kamayin HaMizgaber, and he felt that he was the greatest Talmud. This story happened after the passing of Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakai. Now, the Talmidim went to Yavne. Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakai, the Midrash relates, his wife came from Dimyoisis, or from an area near this river, which was a place that was very megusha. So says the Gemara that Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, after the patching of his Rebbe, he went there. And there is where they had a lot of this, the wine. That is where you had these springs that were very therapeutic, and it was very geschmack. And what happened was, sadly, Imshech Basrayu, his indulgence in the Gashmi, took him Lefi Erkoi away from his connection to Torah, and the result was, tragically, he forgot his knowledge. You know to what point? Listen to this. When he finally chapped, I got to go join my chavedim, have a goyla lemekoim Torah, that's him about himself. So also come lemikra b'sifra. He got an Aliyah. Parshas boy. Kimin hagam, everyone who got called up, they read. Right, that's Levi. And boy lemikra, instead of reading the words hachodesh az Elochem, Gevalt, he changed the dalet for a reish. He changed the Zion for a Yud. He changed all the middle letters. The Pneumius, something got lost in the Pneumius. The Chaf became a base, and he read the words, Hachedish Hayalibam, that their hearts became silent. Now, does it mean that he forgot how to read? Didn't forget how to read, but the fact that the Hashgacha Pratis, he made a mistake in the inner part of every letter. Like what's Kamayan? Kamayan is the highest level of Chachma. So he lost access to his Chachma. That's the Pshat Yakar Talmudei. And what happened? Boy, Rabbanan Achmi Alei Ba'adar Talmudei. And that's behind the Tlan that he says that have a Goyel L'Mekhaim Torah. And Ba'al Toimer Shitova Yacharecha, which is what his wife told him, that you are the greatest Talmud. You go to where we live, and everyone will come join you. But they didn't. And you know what happened? When the moment he was separated from his Chaverim, as great as he lost his Torah. Because it's our learning together. We are Mekayim each other. We sharpen each other. And indeed, Tani, we learned that because in Pirkei Avos, look inside Perek Dalet, right? I think it's Halacha Ches, wherever the Mishnah says that it says Rebbe Nehoiroi. That's him. That Loi Rebbe Nehoiroi Shemai. Either Nechem Yeshemai or V'Amri La Rav Lazar Arach Shema. Because he was so great. He came back to it. He illuminated Oir's Chachma. Mayan is Chachma. No, he had access to Chachma, which is the Pneumius. And that's the middle letters. It's amazing. It's the middle letters that he got confused in. And just to quote the Hayim Yoim from Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and when it says Adam Kiyamus Ba'oil, meaning Lahamis as Kol Hatanugim Be'inyoni Oilam, writes the Rebbe, according to Friedrich Rebbe. Because Kiafilu Devarim Kale Ha'erech Betanugei Ha'oilam, Moinim Hema Milayos Masur V'Nasun Bi'alei Shal Torah. You can't ultimately have it both. You have to pick. And that indulgence and that special wine or that special waters that temporarily disconnected him, but his Chaverim, Boyer Achmei, there's always hope, Chavra, and all of it came back. Okay, we'll stop over here, my friends, to be continued. This is your fellow. All right, Chavra, Gewaldik, Azam Maisa, the greatest.
Thank you. Beautiful.